I'd like to call to order the special Finance Committee meeting. Welcome everyone here. I'm assuming Ms. Adams will be here shortly to join us, but we will get going. And I appreciate we have the entire council here with her exception. This is the kickoff meeting for our annual budget process. Just a few minutes, I'm going to turn this over to the city manager, and he and some other folks are going to present the budget. I do want to mention, before we get started, this is the first of a number of meetings. This Thursday at 4 o'clock, same time as today, we'll go over the capital budget. And that same night again, this coming Thursday, at 6 o'clock, we'll have a public hearing. Anyone in the public who would like to comment on the budget can do it then. Next week, we will meet Thursday, June the 6th at 4 o'clock as well. And then the city council will take the budget up at the June 17th meeting of the city council, which is the second meeting of the month, which is when we normally do the budget. So with that, Mr. Fate, I'll turn it over to you and let you run with it.
Thank you. We'll see how this goes. We'll get Scott up here shortly to answer all the detailed questions. But I want to do a little bit of an overview part first, just to give you a general sense of how we've tried to put this budget together, what we're trying to do, and where we're trying to go, because I'm positive there'll be a fair number of questions this year. I will say I'm pleased to be presenting a budget back to the City of Winston-Salem governing body, only this time as your city manager instead of a part of the budget staff, which was quite some time ago where that occurred. So you look at then and now, I told Scott, do we have a picture that shows what we were looking at back in the mid 80s versus where we're at today in the city? And as you can see, if I hadn't said the time, I was going to tell you when I was here before, we could only take black and white pictures. We're finally back into the color now.
Not that old.
It just seems that way some days. The city has changed significantly since I was here previously. So being in the city of arts and innovation, I find it amazing to see the many unique expressions and the diversity that we have in the neighborhoods that make this city such a great and unique and desirable place to be. We are a growing community with a wealth of diversity, serving as a center for healthcare, showcasing vibrant entertainment, many of quality of life improvements. So it's no wonder that we're listed on so many best of lists. So looking at the past several months as I've been here, I've been taking the opportunity to meet with residents, staff, and each of you to get a better understanding of the community priorities and the level of employee engagement that we have in the organization, along with the vision that you have for making this the community of choice for all of our residents and employees. I can tell you in meeting with employees in every department and across all levels of the organization that you have a highly motivated workforce that is striving each and every day to provide outstanding services to this community. We are diligently working on the city's strategic priorities and developing policies and practices that will improve the efficiency and transparency in how we deliver community services. As you can see on the slide, we are ranked at or above the U.S. average in many of the services that we deliver. And top priorities as have been expressed by you and the community as well in areas such as crime prevention, streets and sidewalks, and in affordable housing. I'm particularly proud to share again with you these benchmarking stats that came out of that employee resident satisfaction survey that show Winston-Salem as a great place to live, a great place to raise children, and a great place to work, beating our national and regional benchmarks substantially in all of those categories, and intending to show improvements over the last 5 years in each of those areas as well. We compare well to our other communities. We have a strong financial foundation that is supporting many projects in the city that help to do this, and many are underway in the city as well. I will say that this year we will continue the trend that you started last year of concentrating on completing the projects that we have ongoing before we take on a lot of new projects. In looking at the various strategic priorities that you've laid out for us, one is economic vitality and diversity. We've seen an uptick in new businesses that desire to locate here and businesses that are seeking to expand. We've had city-funded economic development projects and incentives that have grown the tax base and jobs, with 17 active incentive projects representing over $1 billion in tax base growth over the last several years. We've been listed as one of the 100 best places to live by Livability magazine and one of the top 15 large cities in the United States to start a business. We've added resources to assist small business and minority and women business-owned enterprises. And we've spent more than $17 million in annual MWB spending in the last year. So we'll continue these partnerships in this budget to reduce poverty and to eliminate barriers to economic mobility. In being a safe and secure community, most of the city resident perceptions on public safety outside of efforts to reduce crime rank much higher than our national averages. The police department has made strategic advancements in crime prevention and response with the opening of the real-time crime center that you see in the picture there, and installation of cameras and license plate readers throughout the city. The proposed budget includes a drone as a first responder program pilot, which will be the first, I think, of its type anywhere in the U.S. Recent city funding has approved the addition for fire stations that have been completed, like 13 and 3. And talking with the chief, we still have much to go in terms of upgrading all of our fire stations, as many other buildings we have in the city. In this budget, however, is funding, a significant funding to deal with the overtime cost in the fire department and being able to staff all of the apparatus that we have in each of these existing 20 fire stations. And you'll hear more about that as we go along. The BEAR team is also producing outstanding results, and that funding is assured through this year, and based on council's priority, will be included in the future funding as well. In the area of livable neighborhoods, affordable housing needs across the community remain a high priority, as you spend a lot of your time talking and dealing with affordability. More than $35 million of affordable and workforce housing production and renovation has been appropriated since 2021. As you all know, we are working very hard on producing an affordable housing summit that will be coming up in the next budget year. And we're working to establish the Housing Trust Fund with the Winston-Salem Foundation. We're also looking at ways to enhance our supportive housing projects to deal primarily with those folks that are having a hard time finding a place to live. We've also included many of quality of life aspects with the development or redevelopment of multiple park sites throughout the city, including Grant at the Quarry at Grant Park, Haynes Park, Marshall Park, Long Creek Park, Bethania Freeman's Park, Salem Lake Park, Winston Lake Park, and Washington Park, to name a few. We will continue those efforts to make sure all the parks across the city are top quality facilities for our residents to enjoy. In the priority area of healthy environment, we continue to move forward with sustainable initiatives and support for the green economy. We recently completed our first rooftop solar array installation on the Bruce Stewart Municipal Building next door, with planning for additional funding ongoing. We have acquired multiple alternate fuel vehicles, and that effort will also continue. We've updated policies regarding naturally landscaped areas to allow residents and city maintained areas to be pollinator friendly and reduce greenhouse emissions. Several of our departments have partnered together to create space such as at Happy Hill Park, adjacent to the Salem Creek Greenway, of some of those natural pollinator areas. In our utilities areas, we also continue to invest in our infrastructure to make sure that we're providing high quality services in a healthy environment. Under quality transportation, You have seen multiple projects and improvements in our corridors and have been completed or underway, including realignment of downtown traffic patterns, removing one-way streets, the multi-use paths along the Salem Parkway corridor, multiple bridge replacement projects, and improvements to sidewalks and pedestrian crossings across the city. Council recently approved a contract to a new public transit vendor to improve services and service levels and to reestablish night and weekend service standards that have been a community priority. Another resident satisfaction priority in this area is street resurfacing. This budget provides additional recurring funding from an increased motor vehicle fee tax, a new revenue source, to make annual contributions directly to this program. We're also contracting with a firm to get good data on our pavement conditions ratings, which will allow us to focus on expediting resurfacing of the street segments in greatest need in the community. Finally, in service excellence. The community satisfaction survey that we talked about earlier shows an overall high level of satisfaction for services provided by the city, higher than the region or the nation typically. We're also showing significantly higher ratings for the overall quality of services and overall value received for tax dollars and fees, beating both the regional and national averages in these categories by more than 10%. Now, I want you to remember that one as we keep going through and Scott presents some of his dollar amounts. We rank higher in those areas. The resident survey shows that perceptions of openness towards people of diverse backgrounds are significantly higher than our regional and national benchmarks, which is could be attributable to things like our language access and building integrated communities programs that we have in the city and are maintaining. Establishing and maintaining a competitive employee compensation system that supports internal and external equity with a market-based pay philosophy is a key organizational priority supported by council action and is the key priority in this budget. The proposed budget includes funding to make necessary classification and compensation changes to our current system based on the class and compensation study that is currently underway and soon to be completed. While those details are being finalized, the budget will include across-the-board pay increases up to the new minimum for many positions that are out of classification range, and compression adjustments for those employees that have been with the city for a substantial amount of time and shown their loyalty to the city. We're also proposing increasing the minimum wage to around $18 an hour, or the minimum wage for city employees. So in looking at the fiscal year budget and our budget priorities, as I mentioned, that first priority is investing in our employees. We want to make sure that we have the best, most qualified people in place to deliver the services that you and our community are demanding from us. To do this, we have to pay competitive wages with our counterparts in the region. We also know in service levels, there's priorities in crime reduction, public transit, street maintenance, housing, and community appearance solid waste collection, all areas that we will be focusing on in this budget and in the upcoming year as we move to a new strategic planning model. In meetings with my employees, they have identified many unmet needs to respect the city facilities, equipment, and long-term capital planning. You will see in this budget significant amounts of new dollars for equipment and some efforts to begin looking at our building needs and also looking at longer range capital planning. So our capital plan this year, we're not in the 2/3 year. Next year, we'll see a lot of those come to fruition. I do have to caution council that we have seen, just as our neighboring jurisdiction across the, I would say across the plaza, but across a couple of streets from us, that our financial ratios are not where we need them to be, particularly in our terms of our long-term financing and debt. So to maintain our AAA bond ratings, we're going to have to make some specific adjustments and decisions over the next 2 years as to how we're going to improve those ratios. Some of those are economic ratios, but some of them that we have more control over are the financial and how we structure our debt and what we actually issue debt for. The election of a new governing body in November also presents an opportune time to review our strategic priorities and develop strategies that will enhance the culture of our organization and improve our ability to offer the services that residents have noted as priorities in the community survey and elsewhere. Before I turn it over to Scott, one last chart that I wanted to show you. We have had some challenges basically based on our slow revenue growth and opportunities that we need to address to move the needle forward in how we deliver our operational and strategic goals. If you look at the median residential tax value, that's the assessment value. That's not how much you go out and buy a house for today. That's the median value that's on our tax roll. Winston-Salem lags all of our major cities in the North Carolina by a substantial amount. Part of that is due to when we've revalued and our revaluation schedule being lagging behind everybody else in this group. But even the ones that you'll see up there like Greensboro, who revalued since us, will be doing another revaluation this year. Durham has told us that they believe that their value will actually eclipse anything that you see on this board when they revalue next year as well. They expect to be well in the 400,000 range. So our median value that we're basing our assessments on is $145,000 right now in the city. Next year is a revaluation year, so we do expect to see that go up. But again, we're far behind our comparison cities that we look at, our sister cities. That impacts our tax rate. So when you look at those rates that are up there, we're 60% behind Greensboro, 170% behind Raleigh. So when you look at the average tax bill that they're paying, you look at the math on that, a tax rate for us is going to result in substantially, a similar tax rate results in substantially less revenue than in any of our sister communities. And Scott's going to present some additional details on that in a few more moments as he talks about some of the other specific drivers in the proposed budgets. And then we'll come back after he presents the details with a few more comments.
Thank you, Pat, for kicking us off. I get the dubious task of getting a little more into the weeds and details here as we have done in the past. So we will talk about the overall budget and then spend a considerable amount of time, as we have each year, talking about the general fund and generally the drivers of tax rate increase, as well as some of the other resources that we are looking to the community for to enhance services in the fiscal year 24-25. In terms of the total budget for fiscal year 25 across all funds, you see the increase there to roughly $660 million. Over in the bottom right corner, you can see that our operating budgets are up a little less than 8%. We'll talk about why the debt service is there, but there's a specific type of spike in a debt obligation that we have that goes up and down every other year based on balloon payments. And then capital improvements, you can see there a little more than 3%. Again, it's not a 2/3 bond year, so there are some things going up and down, but not a considerable difference year to year in capital. So when we look at that overall, from year to year, it is roughly a $51 million change from the total budget from the prior year. And as I talked with the manager, we decided to put forward a little bit of a different list than we had in prior years. Instead of showing an accounting of this, we are talking about the major budget drivers, what actually causes that difference of $51 million. And as Mr. Pate discussed, the first thing on the list is the compensation study. Compensation study, as we will see on later slides, scheduled to be implemented in October, so 3/4 of that cost is slated for the fiscal year 24-25, a little less than $16 million across all funds. As we talked about the debt service on the prior slide, you can see there that our leasing fund for our internal leasing program has an $18 million balloon payment that will go up this year and then go back down next year. You do see a decrease in the debt service fund of a little more than $6 million in principal and interest payments as we've paid off some of our older debts and have yet to issue some that may be coming forward. Vehicles, equipment, Mr. Pate again talked about investments in employees and the equipment and vehicles that they need to do their jobs on a daily basis. And so for the third year in a row, we see a pretty substantial increase in costs related to replacing vehicles across the board. Going further down, transit operations up $7 million. The contract was already approved by the mayor and city council a month or so ago for the new transit operation provider that the manager discussed. And then again, we see about a $6 million increase in water and sewers, total budget, and then a plug at the bottom for the difference. But those are the major budget drivers across all funds for the fiscal year 25. Got two slides here, one kind of just showing by service area and then resources on the expenditure and revenue side. As we talk to the public, our budget, all funds, environmental health is the largest component because we run a city-county utility system, so water and sewer is a very large component of our budget, followed by public safety, police and fire being the two largest in the general fund, taking up roughly half or more of the general fund resources, and then further down the list. On the resources side, you can see property taxes at 31%, a little higher in the past, again, as we'll show you a proposed property tax rate increase. Charges for service, again, there are a lot of things that fall in there, but that largest component of that is water and sewer charges for service. And sales taxes, I've got a little chart on sales taxes we've been looking at the last couple of years. We have a little bit of growth in sales tax, but not nearly what we have been seeing for the last 2 or 3 years. So, what does this mean overall to a resident, and what are we looking at here? So major taxes and fees changed in this proposed budget. The first bullet point up there, 3.9 cents for the general fund, and we will talk about what that 3.9 cents is going to do with respect to compensation and equipment and other things. 2.5 cents for the transit fund, as we discussed last month in front of council. That 2.5 cents is specifically for the increase in cost for the new provider. There is still a need going forward into fiscal year 26 to look at the operating deficit that existed before that new transit provider was slated to come on board. And so would venture to say that you will see policy and decision choices in the 26 budget as well related to increased resources and or expenditure reductions for the transit service. Water and sewer rates at a 7% increase as recommended by the City County Utilities Commission. Continuing forward with our stormwater rate increase, so this will be the second year in a row, 8% effective in January. Again, there were no rate increases for the 15 years before that, so we are doing some catch up as a lot of these capital projects are coming online and are getting more expensive. And then the note at the bottom, the motor vehicle privilege tax. Residents currently pay $15 per vehicle. We have state statutory authority up to $30. Raleigh, Greensboro, and Charlotte took that opportunity many years ago when the state gave it to us. Durham is the only major city that has not, and they implemented the transit sales tax instead of this many years ago. So they will be the only of the top 5 not charging $30 per vehicle. I will also stop and note here, and you'll hear again on Thursday, all of that $15 per vehicle, which creates roughly $2.8 million annually, will go directly to street resurfacing in this budget. What does it mean for the taxpayer overall, the average taxpayer? As property taxes would be slated to increase roughly $93 on that median home value of $146,000. Water and sewer charges at 7% of roughly $42 annually, and down the list is roughly $170 a year or $14 a month. All of these taxes and fees combined, again, for the median residential tax value on a house with the average use of water, a 2-vehicle household, and a 2,000 to 4,000 square feet of impervious surface. Where does that put us compared to our peers? So as the city manager discussed, our property tax valuations compared to our peers, and you saw the revaluation schedules, several of those other counties and their cities therein have done revaluations over the course of the last 2 or 3 years. And you can see that even though their tax rates may be lower than ours, they are generating significantly more. That bottom blue line is a city property tax bill. So even though Raleigh's property tax rate may be half of what ours is, if you live in Raleigh, in their median home value, you are paying $350 a month, roughly more. We continue to be, by this metric, significantly cheaper than the peer cities that you see in the comparison group here, both on the property taxes as well as in the other city fees and charges, which include those motor vehicle privilege tax fees increased here, as well as stormwater and any mandatory solid waste fees. We don't have any mandatory solid waste fees, but you see Raleigh over there at $417 on the far left. Raleigh has more than, I believe, more than $200 annually in residential mandatory solid waste fees.
Scott, this represents the proposed increase.
It does. Yes, it does. And represents the proposed increase for all of those other cities as well, as we accumulated that data.
Thank you.
So we do have some other fees that we are proposing to change in the FY25 budget, several of them that have not been touched in quite some time. On the left side of your screen, you'll see some planning and development services fees related to some of the trades. You see moving from $65 to $75, a fee that hasn't been moved in more than 10 years. As you see, many of those fees have not moved in quite some time, so those will be borne by the development community. On the right side, the one to probably highlight here is the new initial periodic inspection fee in the fire department of $50. That is something that every other major city in North Carolina is charging. The folks in fire like to tell me, I think Davie County or Moxville or somebody is charging it too. We are kind of getting up to speed on where we need to be compared to our peers to be able to provide the resources to do those services. What I will tell you is with the changes in fire inspections, we are using that revenue to hire 3 new inspectors to meet the backlog of inspections currently out there and to give them the capacity to continue to meet the needs going forward. So we're not simply raising fees just to provide revenue. We are raising those fees and using it specifically for that service. And then at the bottom, an engineering plan review fee, again, $2 per linear foot. We'll have a minimum with it, but that is, again, a cost recovery method for something that we are doing on a regular basis. Property tax base, so you can see here, if you look at the bullet points on the right, we are projecting 1.8% growth from fiscal year 24 to fiscal year 25. Average non-revaluation year growth of the last 3 years has been 2.2, so we are below that, but I would draw your attention to the double asterisk at the bottom, which is that the county tax office in their most recent estimate had given us less than 1% growth. So I want to note that we are being slightly more aggressive than the county tax office has suggested and more aggressive than we would have been in the past, partially because the county tax assessor has been missing it a little bit, and so there is an ability he holds back some of that base for things related to appeals or other things he considers that may be coming down the pipeline. And it's good to be conservative, but I think he's been a little overly conservative in certain places. But we are being more aggressive than we have been in the past with what we expect the tax base to organically grow for fiscal year 25. Historical property tax rates, just looking at the last 5 years here again, so a total tax rate increase when you look at the 2.5 for transit and the 3.9 for the general fund, getting us to 72.5 cents from where we currently are at 66.1. You can see that in FY22 during a reval, we dropped the rate a little bit. And for various reasons, we have increased it, be it the recycling program increases, compensation that we did last year, and other initiatives. Just a note on sales tax, again, I would draw your attention between the columns for FY 2020 to 21 and 21 to 22. We were seeing actual revenue growth north of 15%. That is not something that is sustainable over time. And you can see as we go into the next few years, we are projecting revenue growth at less than 4%. We're actually projecting countywide distributions to be in the 2% range. And then we're on an ad valorem distribution. And so that actually allows us to get a little bit more than the county does if we raise our property tax rate a little more than they do. So we're thinking 2% kind of retail sales growth, which would lead to a little bit more revenue with the property tax rate that we have. If you look at by quarter, you can see we only had 1% growth in the first quarter, just under 3 in quarter 2. Sales tax is about 3 months behind in terms of distribution, so we've not finalized quarter 3, but we're hoping to be in the 2% range. The note there is that is less than what we budgeted for this year. All funds, we are slated to come in more than $2 million under budget on sales tax receipts. The city manager did talk about employee compensation, and I'm going to hit it in the same vein. The compensation and classification study that we currently have going on would create new pay plans for all city employees, be they in public safety or amongst the regular general employee base. Those new pay plans are based on market analyses, and so the further you are behind the market, you would expect to see hopefully a little higher of an increase in specific classifications as those minimums are moved to what they should be within the market. The study specifically, and as the manager said, is still kind of underway to be completed soon, but would include 4% base adjustments for eligible employees, increases to those new minimums when the classification suggests they should move upward, and then adjustments for compression based on years of service. And again, with a minimum wage, what they have recommended at $17.96 per hour, or right at the $18 per hour mark. We're still working through that. We will have the consultant or one of the staff members from the consultancy firm here on Thursday to talk more about where we are in terms of our total employee base compared to the market and how the classification and compensation study has been handled and what those recommendations look like. So we will have him first on the agenda on Thursday before Capital, give him 15 or 20 minutes to tell you at a high level how this process has worked and what we look like compared to our peer jurisdictions in that group. I have not updated these slides from 2 months ago. These are the same ones we showed at the committee of the whole meeting when we were over at Union Station, again showing that pre-COVID we had much lower vacancy rates than we have now, although we have made some changes. Again, the highest vacancy rates in departments with more than 25 positions: field operations, fleet, police, DOT, engineering, neighborhood services, and utilities. Some of these we have managed to move the needle a little bit, and in other cases we have managed to go in the wrong directions. Field operations, fleet, and engineering have higher vacancy rates now than they did at this time last year, indicating, again, some of those positions are very difficult to fill. So that is the higher level summary, and we will move directly into the general fund at this point and start talking about the nuts and bolts of what's moving inside our main operational fund. This is a very large table, and I'm sorry for including it with all of the numbers that are on here. I'm just going to hit a few things as a highlight. If you're looking at that top line that says property taxes, you see $14.6 million. Again, we are raising the tax rate 3.9 cents for the general fund. That creates additional revenue for the things that we need it for. You see intergovernmental up $1.4 million. We're not changing anything there. Utilities, sales taxes, and utilities franchise taxes are up. As we go down into the personnel section of this, we will have individual slides on personnel and non-personnel operating costs. But generally what I would tell you there, when you see the recurring personnel costs, that's the compensation study coming through. In the support to other funds area, you see a $200,000 increase. It's a net of a few things, but we're also going to talk about there is a general fund subsidy to Winston-Salem Fairgrounds and the Bowman Gray Stadium funds that we have been talking about for about a year and a half, and those will be materializing in the FY25 budget. One of the most important things I think to note is down there closer to the bottom where it says recurring use of fund balance, 0. We are not using any of our fund balance for recurring purposes. We are using them for one-time purposes. The vast majority of what you see, $5.5 million, is $4 million worth of equipment in the fire department that has to be replaced once every 10 years. And so in terms of a GFOA best practice, we are not using cash reserves to fund things that we are going to need to fund in perpetuity. So again, on the personnel side, I've tried to break this out a little more than we have in prior years and show recurring salaries and wages up there at the top. Again, the compensation study going to be effective in October, so 3/4 of it will be found in the FY25 budget. Did want to show that supplemental pay that the mayor and city council approved last year. That was one time. We did use multiple types of fund balance for that, but as it was a one-time payment, that has gone away from the general fund. You do see a slight reduction in benefits costs there, and then we are choosing to leave the salary savings adjustment where it is at. We are currently realizing more in salary savings than we budget, but if we fill some of those positions as we expect to, hopefully that will normalize down. Hitting some of the higher notes there, again, minimum wage slated to go to nearly $18 an hour. We do have the addition of those 3 fire inspectors I talked about to meet the backlog that they have. As Mr. Pate mentioned, nearly $2.5 million into fire operations overtime. Budget and fire will be working together to do a review of that, to look at what is the best funding model for what they need to provide services. And so although we have included it in overtime because that is what they are operationally in need of right now, it may be that a different service delivery model that includes additional employees in the field by reducing that overtime down in the future may be what they need. So we will be coming back to you in FY26 to talk about a model for sustaining operations in the fire department using that funding. And then also, as I noted above, maintaining current benefits. You don't see it here, but we are using some of the cash reserves in the benefits funds to keep the benefits rate a little bit lower in 25 as we've created a little bit of cash in prior years. On the non-personnel side, supplies and services up nearly $6.7 million. Again, $4 million of that is the self-contained breathing apparatus for the fire department. We do have quite a few things on the next slide I'll show you as well. Lease payments for vehicles going up $3.7 million. Note there, almost a third of our equipment is outside of the recommended replacement schedule, putting us a little bit more than 3 years behind on what is a 8 to 10 or 12-year replacement schedule for the vast majority of our equipment. We'll also note the equipment that we are buying is getting significantly more expensive. Anecdotally, I was telling someone I started 12 or 13 years ago, and you could buy a fire truck for $450,000, and we're now budgeting $1.2 million for that same fire truck, and the ladder trucks are pushing $2 million. We continue to see 10+% increases in vehicle acquisition costs for the vast majority of our vehicles. In terms of those things that were on the supplies, services, and contract side, again, SCBA is up there. There's the $1.2 million or $1.1 million that is a subsidy to the fairgrounds and Bowman Gray Stadium. As those funds have exhausted their cash balances, the general fund is now picking up the operating deficit. We do have street lighting in there. That $810,000 is a combination of Duke Energy raising the rates on us, as well as setting aside money for the transition to LED lighting, which we would get some, I believe, done over 4 years and get some cost savings back from beginning in year 5 and thereafter. There's quite a bit of inflation in police contracts. We do have some IS charges that are going up. A lot of that funds the necessary infrastructure and laptop replacements, phone replacement, and things of that nature. Building maintenance, utilities increases, water and sewer charges going up, Duke Energy going up, and we are trying to invest in our buildings. As Mr. Pate mentioned, I do believe in the FY26 capital budget next year, you'll see some more substantial changes related to how we fund capital building maintenance. But we do see some increases in the general fund in 25. Mowing and landscaping contracts are based on inflation, plus we have to take over what NCDOT had built and was maintaining at Research Parkway in 52, and I believe that is about $170,000 a year. And we don't need to go on and on down the list, but you can see the litany of things that adds up to more than $8 million. I will note over on the left, if you're trying to do the math in your head from previous slides, these are our nets. There are some things that we did one time for the compensation study was a one-time cost to hire the consultant in the current year, and you've got things like the energy management study that were coming out of that. So those costs are reductions overall. Don't want to continue to really belabor this one, but again, nearly $18 million worth of equipment to be replaced in the general fund. I've left some of these pictures the same. There are 4 fire trucks in the FY25 budget. They are prohibitively expensive. There are 78 vehicles for the police department. I believe 60 of them as marked patrol cars. We do have several automated side loaders in sanitation, and I have left the same Camry hybrid that we had last year, noting that for all of our what I would call light vehicles, sedans, that with the ability to purchase them as hybrid models, we are doing so. Again, that's based on availability. All of those can be found in the back of the proposed budget book, the entire listing. We're not using quite as much fund balance for as many purposes in 25 as we were in 24. As you see on the left side, 4 million of that, or 4.1 million to cover SCBA, and then we are proposing to use $1 million for the convention center roof and just under $300,000 for an elevator modernization in the Bryce A. Stewart parking deck. And then on the other side, we are still programming money annually for the 2 positions that are running the city's fiscal recovery program and doing monitoring of those grant awards. So that's a lot of what's in the budget. What is not in the budget? There were an additional more than $7 million worth of requests from various departments across the organization. I would say that number includes some things they might think they need, as well as some things that might be on a wish list. But when we look at raising the tax rate, we don't want residents to think that we are just simply adding whatever is requested. There are quite a few things outside of what is in the proposed budget from the city manager. There are operating requests totaling more than $3 million for enhancements to current services that are not included in this budget. And we have shown varying amounts for recurring funding for affordable housing. $5.6 million represents roughly 2 cents on the tax rate if you were to do that. which would generate, I believe, somewhere in the neighborhood of 150 units annually at the 35,000 per mark. And then street resurfacing. So the number you saw at the committee of the whole for street resurfacing was a larger number than this, $2.8 million larger. It's been reduced by $2.8 million as we are proposing to implement the new motor vehicle privilege tax, which would generate that amount annually for street resurfacing. That is the annual need above and beyond what we are proposing in the 25 budget to get streets on a 30-year resurfacing cycle. So that is, from a budget perspective, the high level of what is in the general fund for fiscal year 25. In terms of where we expect to end the year for FY24, we do actually expect to spend some fund balance, roughly $11.2 million of that. If you look over to the right, the vast majority of the amount of the fund balance that we're using is actually coming from our fiscal recovery fund. So if you remember, the auditors made us basically drag all of the revenue replacement money from ARPA into the general fund to spend it, and it's going to take us several years to spend it. So of that amount, we're spending roughly $8 million of that in 24. And $3.2 million in unassigned fund balance. We did have several things. There were capital projects that we were going to spend unassigned fund balance for, as well as part of the supplemental pay adjustments and some of those management studies. We budgeted significantly more than $3.2 million in unassigned fund balance, so we're actually spending less than we said we were going to. We're coming in under on expenditures, but as I said, we'll be a little bit under on sales tax and a little over on property tax. So on the resource side, we're coming in about where we thought we were. Shifting away from general fund operations to talk about some of our business type activities and enterprise funds. We talked about the 2.5 cents that is for the transit fund. This chart includes the 2.5 cents that we are proposing to increase for transit. It does not look substantially different than it did last year. Again, the new contractor proposed a cost that is roughly $7 million more annually, and the 2.5 cents generates about $7 million. So we just are showing the same rough deficit that we were annually going forward. Again, continued lower fare box revenues. Fare box revenues have not recovered to levels that they were at years ago. One of the major things, as we look and you see some of the increase in fund balance, this fund was propped up by CARES and ARPA money, by federal money. Many of our neighboring jurisdictions were also doing the same thing and are seeing that falling off. Costs are increasing substantially, and the resources are decreasing from that. We talked about the tax rate increase specifically for this. It does include expenditures for grant matches for bus replacement, but does not include a substantial amount for future facility renovations. That would all have to be modeled in again in the future. The last bullet point is the one I'll draw you back to, which we've already said once, which is we will be coming back to you in fiscal year 26 to talk about additional resources or service and expenditure levels. Winston-Salem Fairgrounds Fund. So we talked about the subsidy here. Two things on there. The light blue line that goes across and maintains fund balance at roughly $500,000 is what happens if the general fund continues to pick up the loss in those funds, Fairgrounds and Bowman Gray Stadium over time. But we wanted to show you kind of what they were projecting to lose over the course of several years as well. So again, the idea here is there are probably some conversations to be had about appropriate levels of revenue generation in those facilities and what their economic benefit is in total, and should the taxpayer and the general fund be subsidizing them, knowing that there's a greater economic benefit to the community. So you can see the individual losses there for the Fairgrounds and Bowman Gray Stadium in the $800,000 and $380,000 range. That assumption doesn't include other significant operating revenues other than events that they're currently doing. So we're making their revenues match what they're actually bringing in, but there's no new types of fees or enhanced revenue sources in there. Moving on to the Stormwater Management Fund, again, you see an 8% increase in this year's budget, as well as 4% in the model and outlying years. This basically shows you there are a lot of projects in the hopper that Mr. Huff and his staff are working on, and as they get past design and into the construction phase of many of those, we will see millions upon millions of dollars in cash being spent out of the Stormwater Management Fund. Excuse me. We do see continued operating spending at a lower level, even though capital is starting to go up. And the last bullet point, again, is what I would draw your attention to in terms of long-term analysis of what the rate structure for that fund needs to look like, what the expenditures need to look like, and if there is a need for additional debt authorizations. We did issue revenue bonds at some time back. And so the question would be, is there an opportunity to go back out and do that again? And is it financially prudent to do so? So we'll stop here before turning it back over to Mr. Pate and say that is kind of the higher level summary of the fiscal year 25 budget, all funds, general fund, and then selected enterprise funds. Happy to stop at this point and take any questions that you might have. And if not, then turn it back over to Mr. Pate for a closing.
Why don't we let Mr. Pate finish, then I'll open up for questions for anybody.
Sounds great.
That's why you're the chair.
What's that?
That's why you're the chair. Get these things straight. So just a few final points to elaborate on some of the things that Scott was bringing in here and that we've talked about in the early part of this presentation. I know budgets are an annual thing, and we'll do these once every year as you go along, but we really believe you need to look at a sustainable model of how we're looking at various things in the community. So I'd encourage you to think past this year to the other issues and needs that we have as a community and what we're going to be looking at. I'm going to highlight just a couple of those, but this all points to a significant need for us to be very strategic in establishing key priorities and then sticking to those priorities and making sure we're getting our basic needs met that the community desires of us. As Scott just mentioned, transit funding is a critical issue there. We intend to spend time next year in looking with the new transit operator on how services are being delivered, because right now we're on a downward trajectory on those unless we can change our service delivery model to something that's more efficient. So we're going to be looking at that and to make that determination. But those are going to be hard choices as to where bus routes need to be, who needs to be served, where they need to go, and whether our existing model actually meets those needs in an efficient manner. Funding compensation ongoing in the next year. We are not in a position to do one thing in funding and then let it go. As was mentioned, the plans are to implement this in October 1st. So basically, we're doing about 75% funding of what you would need to sustain what's in the program for this year. But we know that this is a moving target. All of our communities around us are also moving their compensation scales on an annual basis. So we need to be have continued planning on how we're going to address the needs of having our employees or being able to recruit and retain the best employees in the area. I will say as a caveat to that, however, that I do think if our compensation levels are at the appropriate place, that gives us the opportunity to look at efficiencies and how we're delivering services and how efficient those individual employees can be. A seasoned engineer can produce more work than someone fresh out of school. We need both kinds of those folks in our organization, but right now we tend to trend towards less experienced people in our organization instead of more experienced that can produce, that I think can have better productivity if we get those people in place. In our strategic planning and funding priorities, I've mentioned, and many of you have mentioned to me as well, there's a variety of facilities that need attention in the community, from parks to fire stations to our fleet facility to where our public works folks are. Some of those facilities are not, quite honestly, are not habitable. We need to do a better job of providing proper places for our employees to work. Affordable housing is an issue that's not going away as a community. Again, we've got a lot of strategies in place to address that. I think council as a body will have to address what is going to be the public role in dealing with the affordable housing crisis. Because it's a nationwide crisis, we can only work on our piece of it. I think part of this needs to be a broader state and federal strategies on how to do this and what other tools they give us in order to address this issue. But one of those all of those ultimately usually require matching funds from the local government. So we're going to have to figure out what we're willing to do and where we're going to get those funds and where we want to place our priority in the affordable housing. Streets and sidewalks has been mentioned. That's probably the number one issue that's been in the resident satisfaction survey for years. We're putting efforts into that. But I will tell you that we don't need to be spending bond monies for maintenance projects, which is what resurfacing is. We need to have an established plan on resurfacing our roads. And if we want to have roads resurfaced in a 30-year cycle, then there's an amount of money that's going to take to do that. That's what we're looking to try to build up to. We've got one step in this year, but it's going to take more steps to get there to where we need. And that includes sidewalks and our other stormwater, all the issues that revolve around our public facilities in the street right-of-ways. And then there are other capital needs. We've talked about equipment or vehicles is a big one that's out there. Vehicles are becoming much more expensive. The more hybrids we buy, they're still more expensive, or electric vehicles than our traditional vehicles. But without a proper equipment, our employees cannot do their jobs appropriately. We're taking one big step with the SCBA and the fire department and putting $4 million towards that, but we can't send firefighters into fires without having proper breathing apparatus. The other point that's up there that we've mentioned briefly is about our debt use and transition to cash or debt use. Right now, if you look at our debt ratios on a per cap, on any number of the ways that you look at those ratios, our debt levels are too high. So that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be issuing debt, but we need to be strategic about what we're issuing debt for, and issuing debt for those things that are long-term assets for the community, not for operating costs. So things like equipment, police cars is a good example. They've got a short life. They're not going to last 20 years. Those should not be debt financed. Even equipment financing now, where 20 years ago you could basically collateralize those and pay little to no interest. That is not the case today, and I don't think that's going to be the case anytime in the near future. So by not cash financing those items, not only are you've got all the carrying costs, but you've also got the interest, all those interest costs that you've got to add on to that. We need to transition back to a sustainable model of paying pay-as-you-go financing for those equipment and maintenance needs. And then finally, review of existing service levels. We know and we understand that nobody likes to pay more for services. So we will do our best to make sure that we're providing all the services in as efficient and effective manner as possible. So we will be looking at a whole variety of service levels. As is mentioned in the message, we've got some positions that were added primarily during the pandemic to do certain things that weren't budgeted. We're going to have to deal with how we either budget for those positions or how we use other positions to replace those costs. So we've got a lot of work on our plate in the next year in looking at how we're delivering services, what services are the priorities of the community and council, and how we fund those in an appropriate manner. I will say I do expect that our revaluation is going to be fairly substantial next year. We've seen that with everybody else that's around us. So your tax, whatever the tax rate is this year, should substantially decrease next year. I firmly believe we'll see a substantial change in those numbers down to something that's more in the range of what some of our sister cities are looking at. But that'll all depend on what our average house values are assessed at. But it will definitely come down. So you're going to see some reduction off of this as we go to next year. So with those, I think Scott was just going to remind you, but I think the chair did this already, of what your schedule is upcoming for the next Thursday for the budget workshop and public hearings, and then continuing council meetings moving towards a June 17th budget adoption. And I believe this Thursday, the 30th, will be at 4 o'clock, and then a public hearing.
I may have misspoke on some of those, but they're.
Oh, yes, this Thursday, May 30th.
We're basically meeting on the next 3 Thursdays.
All in chambers.
Yeah, all there, yeah.
And so that is the conclusion of our prepared presentation today, so we'll stand ready to answer questions.
Let me just make a quick comment. We do have, for $19.95, you can get a book. Oh, they're free, but there are books that have the detailed numbers. We all have them, one up here, and there's also the same cover, but a different book for the capital. So for those folks that have an interest, I think these books are available at various places throughout the city, are they not?
They are also available online.
They're online, okay, thank you very much. With that, I'll open it up to questions. I have a few, but I'll hold mine to the end. Let me start. Aaron, are you the one on the phone with Ms. Adams? Go ahead. Ms. Adams is under the weather, but she is at home watching, and she is calling someone with her questions or comments.
I do not have any yet, but keep an eye on me in case.
Okay, excuse me, okay.
Thank you.
So Mayor Pro Tem asked on the $17.96 an hour, is that for all full-time employees and/or part-time? How does that shake out?
We would look into the compensation study for that. When we have done the minimum wage adjustments in the past, they have been for all full-time and part-time employees, and we have also adjusted the minimums for contracted labor by that same amount. So if we were to do the same process, it would be for all of those, but have to make sure those are the recommendations included in the compensation study.
Yeah, I'm not sure about contracted employees, but the minimum wages for anybody that we're paying an hourly rate to would be paid at that level or higher. And we may actually, Scott said we should round it up to 18 just to make it easy to remember, and we very well might.
And I've got just one quick comment.
Go ahead, and then we'll go around the table here.
I'm really pleased to see that we're taking a look at facilities that our people work in. Nothing says we value your commitment here like a pay increase, but facility improvement is close behind that. So I'm very happy that we're looking at that.
Where do you want to start, James?
Start with you next. Ms. Taylor nodded off. By the way, there will be lots of questions. For most of us up here, this is the first time we've seen it just like you folks. So I've got a lot of digesting and reading to do between now and the next meeting. Mr. Mundy, any initial thoughts?
Yes, thank you. The compensation study, I just want to clarify, is only looking at other municipal employees as opposed to the private sector. Is that right?
No, sir.
Okay, tell me who is included.
You'll get more detail on that, and so I'll give you a brief, but if you'll talk, our consultant can provide that on Thursday. But some of our positions, depending on where they are, may not have good municipal comparisons. So in general, they're looking at the local jurisdictional governments. That data is public, just like ours is. So that's easy to get and it's easy to identify. But they also go back and look at private sector data, which tends to be proprietary, and so we're not shared as to who they're looking at. But for our utilities folks, for example, they're going to go out and look at other private utilities and see what they're paying as a part of our compensation package. Now, having said that, that doesn't mean we're going to be comparable to the private sector in a lot of these positions, but we also believe we have a very good benefits package that's different. But the bottom line to your question is they are looking at the market as a whole for positions to see how we compare.
Good. That was my question. My comment is I see a lot of forward thinking in this budget and taking care of things that in the past I think we thought we could just tighten our belt and get through. And we're seeing that we can't. In the end, that costs more money. So I applaud all of the folks who put the budget together. I don't like paying taxes. I know no one likes to pay more taxes, but we need to pay what it costs to run the city and give us all the quality of life that we expect.
John?
Well, every year we seem to patch it together and hold the costs down, and we seem to have dug ourselves in a bit of a hole. We do these studies that tell us that our facilities are falling apart, that our parks and recreation facilities need attention, that this building that we're in right now needs attention. We learned that we got challenges with recruiting people because our salaries are not competitive. We're losing people because our salaries are not competitive. We've had these studies, and every year we seem to patch it through and try to get along as best we can. It's catching up with us, and we've got to start addressing it in a serious way. This is an ambitious program. I know this is scary in a lot of ways. This is nothing I've ever seen before since I've been on council, the amount of tax increases we're asking for. But if you look at where we are as a city and what we anticipated our hope for our city to be, we can't compromise on this. We've got to hold our ground and be competitive with everybody else. And I think this is what it's beginning to do for us. I know it's a sort of a scary thing to look at first time today, and I'm sure it'll adjust a little bit as it goes along. But I applaud the effort to be visionary and to try to address the problems that we got and from once and for all to get on it. So I applaud your staff and the people that have been involved in pulling this budget together. We'll study it. We're going to spend a lot more time on it, and we're going to get a lot of comment on it, I'm sure. But I think we ought to think about what do we want this city to be in 5 years and stuff, and are we positioning ourselves to do that? And if we're not doing it now, when? You know, we know that other cities, Durham particularly, other cities, Greensboro, are creeping ahead of us. I'm not satisfied with that. So I think we're going to move forward. I appreciate your work on this.
Thank you, John. Ms. Scipio?
I applaud you also for this forward-thinking budget. I'm very concerned that when we talk about increasing taxes, that we don't sacrifice services in any way. But services need to be efficient as well as effective. And I think it is time to take a hard look at every department and see how they're operating, to see if they're using all of the tools that are possible, that are available to minimize costs, but also effect better services. I don't believe people would be against a tax increase if they knew that the services they were getting came at a fair cost and that they're efficient. And it's little things that matter. And I hope that we'll take a hard look at how we do operate, even to the point of how do we cut the grass on the property that the city owns, and why can't we keep it cut in certain neighborhoods? Because it's our properties that's getting the code violations. That to me is a simple thing. But if that's indicative of one little problem, then there are some others that we need to be looking at and seeing how do we provide excellent services. And of course, I'm so in favor of rewarding our employees, compensating them fairly and competitively, and so we don't lose them. We keep losing history, knowledge, excellence when people retire or when they get stolen by some other city. Smaller cities, Lexington, High Point, we're losing our brightest to other cities that's nowhere close to who we thought we were and used to be. I would love for Winston to come back and be the city that everybody wants to come to live and, importantly, work and have a great job, because we respect every employee and what they bring to the city. And so I'm very hopeful that we'll be able to get that done this year, and have open, honest discussions on what makes it better, and talk to the people doing the job, because they have firsthand knowledge of how to make it better, not necessarily a supervisor who doesn't do the job. It's the people who do the work that really can say, this would make it more efficient for me.
Mr. Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Councilman Mundy and Councilman Larson hit the nail on the head. We've been sort of kicking the can down the road for several years, cost and budget and so on. So it's now time we got to take our medicine. And But even in taking the medicine, we're still the lowest of the major North Carolina cities in terms of fees and taxes. That's a good thing, I think. A lot of good forward thinking in this budget, so I congratulate you all for getting us in a good frame of mind. And the compensation study is so important if we're going to reduce those vacancy rates. So a lot of great work thus far. I know the committee's going to work hard on it as well. And there may be some adjustments we can make, but I'm impressed with the amount of work you've done.
Ms. Burke?
Thank you, Chair Clark. Nothing at this time.
Okay. I've got just a few closing comments, and we will be finished about at 5, so we're in good shape. First off, thank all the staff for putting this together. We do have a lot of reading to do for the next few nights, but that's what we get paid for. Just a couple general thoughts, and some of these are more rhetorical questions. I'm just curious, is everybody still on a 4-year revaluation cycle, or are other cities moving to something different? You don't have to answer that now. I think 4 years probably made sense when you had 2% inflation, but if we're going to have 4 to 5% inflation, who knows? But anyway, I would just check on that. Secondly, we've got oodles of little independent funds, and they all got fund balances in this book somewhere. The best example I can give of an enterprise fund is the Water and Sewer Department, and Ms. Driver's sitting right back there. She has a self-contained organization. They sell water and sewer services, and they have expenses that go with it. And what we have charged her with is you're to operate that department such that what we charge people for water and sewer covers the cost to provide that. And it's an inclusive thing. When you pay your water bill, you're not only paying for the chlorine that went in it, you're also paying some of the capital costs for the buildings and pipes and all that. I don't think that's true with a lot of our funds. And I just wrote down fairgrounds and transit as examples. Maybe at one point in years past they did, but you cannot put the transit system or the fairgrounds or Bowman Gray Stadium, or for that matter, the convention center in a circle. The revenues those generate does not pay for even their operating costs, much less their capital costs. And I'm just curious of whether or not we need to continue to call them that, as opposed to just making them part of the budget. I'll just leave that as, again, another question mark. Number 3, transit. There's a huge increase in this budget for transit. I voted for that. We did that probably a month or so ago, but I'm expecting big things from it. Mr. Pate, before you got here, I took a look, and I think I went back 20 years or 15 years. It was a long distance. Now, this was before COVID. And without exception, the ridership went down every year. And it probably has. I know in COVID it went down. I don't know if it's come back a little bit since then. But I suspect if you go out there and look at a 20, 30-year period, you're going to find that thing's gone steadily and steadily down. My nemesis, Mr. Bessie, is no longer here. He and I used to duel on the bus system. But something needs to change there, and I'm hopeful. And the reason I supported this when it came up separately is that we're bringing in some experts, and maybe they can help us run it better. But the few routes that run through my ward are virtually empty. And I have suggested for many years that you consolidate the least traveled routes and take those buses and put them on the routes that people ride more on, and therefore you provide more service. But that's just an amateur's opinion, but I'm hopeful these folks will do it. Give us some good leads. Thirdly, or fourthly, whatever I'm on, bond ratings. It's kind of like in school every now and then that you had a test and the teacher decided whether or not you'd paid attention and done your reading or whatever. It was, an exam was an independent opinion on how well you had done in that class. And I find the bond rating folks a neutral third party that looks at, and they don't just do cities and counties, they do states, they do corporations, a little bit of everybody. What has not been mentioned is the bond rating folks have moved the goalposts on us a little bit. They have changed some of the variables that they're looking at, some of them which we have no control over, which I'm a little concerned about. It's like having to test on something you weren't told or that you have no control over. But I do take their opinion seriously, and I do think we need to make some adjustments, and you have mentioned that, to be sure we maintain our ratings. Fourthly, fifthly, whatever, I am glad to see that we've finally put some money in for road improvement, significant money. Without exception, and I have sat up here longer than the mayor and I are equal in age as far as how long we've been sitting here, but every year we have had a citizen satisfactory study, and every year roads is number one for needs improvement. And I hope that we will finally take that seriously. I have debated whether or not to support future studies because we always seem to ignore them, but we seem to be taking it serious this time. And lastly, I'm hearing a glimpse, and it's making me optimistic that maybe we're going to get back to use the football term, blocking and tackling. Those are the two basic things you do in football. Now, the talking heads use some big words, but you need to learn to block and tackle. And I think we as a city need to get back to that. We have some very basic things we need to do well. And I will acknowledge we have in the room, for you folks out in TV land can't see this, we have a lot of our fire department here and our police department here. We need to do a good job of putting out fires and keeping the city safe. Same thing, we got to have good roads. Mr. Driver's here, we got to have clean water and clean up when we finish. There's just some things we need to do well. And I think at times we have gotten away from that, and I'm going to pick on my favorite one. Somewhere in this study, Mr. Tesh, how much are we spending on operations to keep the hydroponics plant going this year?
It's a few $100,000.
Yeah.
I don't know the number.
Okay, we got a thing to grow lettuce that we never should have built, and now we got to pay the reaper a couple of $100,000 a year to keep it going. That to me, and I hate to keep bringing it up, but it's a classic example of not blocking and tackling. Let's do what we need to do, and some of the other things need to wait for another day. And I will carry that to my grave until we sell it, and that's something you need to do, but that's for a different story. But the point being, there are no free lunches, and when you do something you shouldn't have never done, you're going to end up paying for it for a long, long time. But anyway, I'm optimistic that we seem to be putting more attention on providing the real services that our citizens look to us to do. And it's something that we've made, and I'll finish with this comment, the comments that we've had some folks in this room for the last month or so commenting that we should be getting involved in some things far outside of what we do. But it is my humble opinion that our job that we're elected to do is to provide the basic services that the citizens expect from us. And they do not include national defense or widening the Panama Canal or whatever some of the other folks need to worry about. But we need to be sure we do the best we can on those 8 or 10 services that people really depend on us for. And if we don't provide them, they don't get provided. And I am optimistic this budget is heading in that direction. With that, we will adjourn 10 minutes late, and I'll see everybody back here Thursday at 4 o'clock. Thank you.